G'day and welcome to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. My name is Chris Hayton and this is part 2 of the People and Culture Training and Safety segment. In this episode, I managed to line up a chat with supply chain leader Rich Crowe of the Fermentum Group, including brands such as Stone & Wood, Fixation and just recently acquired Two Birds, as well as being joined by Brew Life and Impact Leader Elise Skinner. Rich, having over 15 years in both small and big brewing businesses, and Elise having a strong HR background, it was a very insightful dynamic to have in our chat, which covers topics such as growing pains a business experiences during growth, creating a healthy team culture, attitudes towards safety, and interesting rewards and incentive programs for the workforce that senior management and business owners can implement to assist with things like staff retention and work-life happiness. This is another great chat from the people and culture angle with yet another successful medium to large size brewery such as Stone & Wood, which complements and adds even greater value to our earlier episode with Chris from Four Pines. So I'll leave you to it then. I hope you enjoy my chat with Rich Crowe and Elise Skinner from Stone & Wood. Well, welcome Elise and Rich to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Mate, good to be here.
Thank you.
Now, this episode is featuring part of our People and Culture segment, which I guess includes a broad number of topics related to, I guess, a brewery's team and working environment, and includes human resource considerations, especially for when a small business is expecting rapid growth, and workplace safety, training of staff, and I guess the overall feel and work culture of the business's work environment. So not a topic that I guess is usually covered in the brewing industry. We tend to gravitate towards the type of beers a brewery makes, the shiny stainless steel equipment that is in a brewery and the cool tap room sort of feel. But I feel that this topic is sort of lacking a bit of coverage in the industry, and it is an important, I guess, aspect of the overall success of a brewery's, long-term growth and expansion. So really glad that I was able to get both you on, Elise and Rich, to talk about this topic with our audience today. So as a lot of people know, Stone & Wood have been a clear leader and example to the independent craft beer industry on how to manage growth and develop a healthy team and work culture. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of those insights on this topic today. And but before we get into all that, I'd like to give the guests a bit of an insight on both your backgrounds to date, career-wise, and a few fun facts, craft beer related, or any homebrew stories maybe. So maybe Elise, did you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Thank you. I've been working in people and culture sort of related roles really for about 20 years now. I'm sorry to say that. It sounds scary, but it's the truth. And I've been with Stone & Wood around 4 years. And at the moment, my role covers people and culture, community and sustainability. So, lots of interesting bits in there for me. This was my first time working in the brewing industry, actually, when I joined Stone & Wood. So for me, I've worked across lots of different industries, from professional services to environmental consulting and international development. So quite a diverse mix of things there. So I've loved getting to know the beverage industry and in particular craft brewing and the craft sector. It's been a great ride and I've really enjoyed it. I don't know, little tidbits. I certainly don't have any home brewing stories to share with you, but I do remember about 2 days before I came for my interview with Stone & Wood, I was at the Bangalow pub here in New South Wales and had a Fixation Squish IPA. And at the time, I didn't realise Fixation was associated with Stone & Wood. And I got to my interview and the first question I was asked is, what's an interesting craft beer you've tried lately? And I was able to say that I'd tried this Squish beer and it was actually one of the beers of the business. So that worked out well for me, I think.
Yeah. Well, they're starting to pop up in the BWSs down here in Sydney, actually. They haven't been that prevalent, the Fixation IPAs down here. But, I got to sample a few of them the other week, actually. So very good drop. All right, great. Rich, a bit about yourself.
Yeah, in a similar way to Elise, closing in on nearly 20 years out post-uni, but I have been always in the beer side of the world. Originally worked with Lion in New Zealand. So originally Canterbury Brewery, pre-earthquake. So that's unfortunately was closed post-earthquake. And also did a stint in Auckland before moving to the UK. When I was in the UK, based in London, I actually was on the consulting side of the picture. So I worked with a company called Electia, now known as Norris, or changed to Norris. That was pretty interesting. It was consulting to some of the pretty big bloody breweries throughout the UK, and also things like Bournemouth Cider, and mainly around capital install and optimization. Moved back to Lion in New Zealand 2011, and got a good opportunity to work in, I guess, their wider portfolio of multi-bev, so wine, RTDs, ciders, what have you. But somehow beer always brings you back. So post that, I worked as a couple of roles there, packaging manager, eng manager, and was lucky enough to get the opportunity with Stone & Wood late 2016. So been with Stone & Wood 4.5 years now, present role as supply chain leader. In that role, I oversee our sites and teams. So with the recent addition of Two Birds now, we have 6 sites, and great addition of Two Birds, by the way. Fantastic people, and happy to have them on board for sure. And 70 odd people plus casual. So certainly there's a lot of people aspects to the role. So happy to share those today. Regarding beer, I suppose in some of those travels over in the UK, the classic places in Belgium, etc., places you sort of learn a bit more about beer than lager. And for me, it was those years from sort of 2007 to 11. One particular highlight I recall going through the US and Heartland Craft, Boulder, Denver. And I remember going to a little craft beer bar. This is sort of 2010, probably pre the big movement around these parts, and having beer out of a barrel. And I thought that was just wild and crazy, and it's just part of the course now. So that wasn't even that long ago when I think about it. So how things have changed.
Yeah, I haven't had the pleasure of actually, I've been to the US, but not in a sort of a craft beer exploration sort of trip. Sampled a lot in the UK, but had many guests on the show so far that have said they've sort of been drawn to the roles that they have now in the industry by doing big trips over the UK and Europe and the US. So do you find yourself, being in your role now, going back there? Obviously pre-COVID, no one's going anywhere these days, but yeah.
Absolutely, mate. I think we're fortunate in that the founders are very encouraging of us getting and experiencing what they did in early years. So I've been over there a few times, particularly centered around the CBC, the annual event. But what I have found the most, I guess, insightful is visiting like-sized breweries. In the US, we would be sort of smallish, there's much bigger players there, so we can get some inspiration and insight, not only in terms of next steps with breweries itself and scaling that, but inspiration around the next kind of big thing, whether it's beer or, more recently Seltzer, I suppose. So, very fortunate to be able to do that, and I do recommend that if you get the opportunity, just to get amongst it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that's something I'd plan to do before I open up my breweries. I think there's going to be a lot of inspiration to be taken from those sort of areas of the world in regards to brewing. But all right, great. Well, moving into the meaty section of our chat today, I want to, I guess, dive into both your insights within the brewing industry in regards to developing and maintaining a healthy team and work culture. I think that's the sort of theme that I'm sort of going for with this episode and the greater segment. So maybe to start this section off nicely, are either of you able to talk about the type of work culture Stone & Wood has created to date?
Yeah, I'll jump in there and at least just jump in, get any additional insights. I think Stone & Wood, we have got, I guess, a good reputation around quality of beer and what have you, but also I think what's been great to hear sometimes is people meet our team and think, what a great culture you have here. And we work really hard to maintain that, and it's, I guess, the foundations of that with Brad, Jamie and Ross all those years ago. And what we really encourage is a very down-to-earth culture. We retain a pretty flat structure, even though we're growing in size, sort of 150 employees now, but it is pretty flat. That means we can connect, it could be a founder connecting to a brewer and everyone knows each other by name and role and maintain the intimacy you certainly have when you're a smaller craft brewer. We kind of it's still referred to as a family. And I'll be honest, it still very much does feel like that. there's a huge amount of friendship as well as camaraderie, not just our colleagues. So that's, first and foremost what we're about, and it really helps you come to work every day because you come away richer for the experience. But that, notwithstanding, there's challenges that we have to work through as well, and we'll talk about it a bit later. But for example, the tensions between safety and growth and those sorts of things, and how you overcome that. Another challenge we had early on and recognised it is around, at the time at least, perhaps a shortage of ready-made brewers. So we almost took down an approach of, right, we're just going to get great people, great cultural fits, start with that, and we'll back ourselves to build great brewers. And it really is, it's honestly really satisfying to see some of our, I guess, alumni now out there brewing some great beers, even locally. Zeke at Red Earth, or Earth, what they call Earth Brew now, and Jez are up at Precinct, keeping close contact with those guys. So it's quite rewarding not only to have built that for ourselves, but to see those brewers now out and about making a difference in the industry at large, I suppose. You build on that, Elise?
I think you mostly cover, I think the other thing in terms of how we've evolved, or one of the things we've tried to do, and it's not easy, is just hold on to kind of some of those foundational values and really be clear on what's important and try to continue to drive that and really make that visible in the business and talk about it a lot, because it is very hard when you're growing rapidly or experiencing a lot of change in a business to hold on to those things and keep them in mind. So that's something we've certainly tried, but that doesn't mean it's always easy to do either. Yeah.
And just going back to Rich, your point about having, I guess, staff available in the industry that are, I guess, are trained or have some sort of relevant experience. I guess there would have been a very big shortage, and there probably still is, of trained brewers. And I know that, and part of this segment, I'm going to be having actually a training episode on with Richard Adamson from Young Henrys, who's been very pivotal in setting up some of the TAFE courses around Australia, particularly here in New South Wales, which I'm actually doing this year as well. But yeah, I'd imagine that the growth of the industry, that there needs to be a growth in training for people as well. So, but I know that we'll probably cover training a bit more in terms of a Stone and Wood perspective on your staff. But I guess my next question would be, what should a small business or brewery owner be prepared for when it comes to growth and expansion? So, you guys experienced great growth over these years. A lot of people listening are just looking at starting their own brewery. There might be some established ones listening in that are about to make that jump or experience a lot of growth. What sort of insights can you offer for those people in being prepared for that growth in terms of a work culture side of things?
Yeah, I might start maybe with sort of some of that people and culture focus, but there's certainly, part of how you support people and culture is also around systems and processes, and lots of things change as you grow that impact people. So I think we'll try and cover some of that too. I think what you have to anticipate is a few things. Certainly, the more you grow and the more people you add, or as people's roles expand, things like just communication become more challenging. How do you make sure everyone's clear on priorities and pulling in the same direction, knowing who does what, knowing how to get things done? All of that can just become more complicated, and you can have a lot of teething pains around that. I think we've certainly experienced that. We've found we've had to constantly revisit communication and keeping in touch with people and being clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're going to do it, because we don't get that right all the time, because you're often running so fast you don't always have time to tick every box that you'd like to. So I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge when something maybe didn't go to plan or wasn't done as well as it could have, or got forgotten, and just make sure you kind of learn from that and keep going. I guess some of the other people aspects I thought about were, you naturally have to start introducing a bit more structure when you grow, and by structure that could be anything. It might be systems, it might be processes, it might be all sorts of things, and that can start to feel quite different as a culture. I think when you're a smaller business, you can be a bit more informal. You might not have the resources and the time to invest in all of those things, and then you inevitably get to a point where you have to start introducing them. And I think you can suffer a bit from people feeling that, well, this isn't us, this isn't how we operate here, this isn't like the good old days. And you've kind of got to go through that transition of growth for everyone to, I think, experience that and then really understand where the business is going and what's exciting about the change or the growth. And I think that's maybe the other element I'll just touch on and then I'll be quiet. But I think you've got to remember too, as you're growing and expanding, that it is exciting and there's lots of good things that comes from that. There's career expansion for people. The more a business builds and grows, the more opportunities it gives people. You might be able to offer different benefits or ways of doing things. So I think remembering to stop and celebrate the success that sometimes comes with the expansion is really important too, and not lose sight of how hard everyone's worked to get there.
I think you make some good points here. And I think whilst you're growing, try to remain anchored in those values you set up early on and return to those. And the business may be maturing and there might be a need for more process or systems, but you don't need to compromise what you're fundamentally about. I mean, having a really important thing to have in place is systems and processes that are robust but are also scalable, because as you increase in volume and even in geography, potentially you might open a separate tap room. The ability to apply that and roll it out makes all the difference. If you're having to revisit that and develop something new all over again, train everyone up, it's a lot of work, and we've certainly had to do that at times, but we're more and more thinking about, well, what would be something that would be sustainable beyond the immediate short term. There's a tension as you grow. We're getting to that scale ourselves where there's a real tension between the ability to maintain systems and processes that are kind of coherent and allow us to have good communication. Still very manual in terms of the way we make beer, still very much crafting, and trying to balance that growth and the things Elise mentioned about that look and feel, perhaps when you're a smaller business. We still want that, but we've now got things like shifts to address, and we want to maintain the sense of camaraderie, etc. So lots of considerations, but I would echo that sentiment around having things in place, whether it's communication or might be SOPs, standard operating procedures. It could be the way by which we log quality data. If you're doing twice as much, does that still stand the test of time?
And I guess an easy trap that a small business experiencing a lot of growth, making that step up into a medium or large size brewery, and Stone & Wood would consider themselves as a large craft brewery these days, is, like you were saying, trying to maintain that flat structure, that the guy on the production floor can have easy conversations with one of the directors of the business, or someone in senior management. And I guess that's probably the difference that you find between some of these large corporations is, people, if they've ever worked in the corporate world, the difference between a small business and the corporate world. So I guess you can find yourself getting into that easy trap of, growth and like you said, trying to keep your processes coherent with the size, but also maintain that culture. It's a balancing act, it almost seems like.
It is, and we're still learning and maturing. To your point about, that flat structure, it also comes down to the culture and the type of people. We want our leaders to be very, very present and know people by name, and not just that, but know what they're, their family, other interests, and stay connected in that regard. And I think perhaps what you're saying is that the hallmark of something more corporate is that distance there. A great thing when I moved to Stone & Wood was seeing how closely sales and production work together, and that, never the twain shall meet kind of thing at some of the bigger businesses. So that was fantastic. And to see, united by a common passion of beer, our sales team, commercial brew life team, brew as much home brew as our brewers and our packaging crew. So
yeah, nice.
Kind of united by a common purpose and common interests really helps with maintaining that culture even as you grow.
Yeah, perfect. And just in regards to safety, so we have another episode in this segment with Victual, who will be talking a bit about, their online platform and turnkey type setup of, how breweries can utilize their platform for implementing safe work systems, etc. But from a brewery perspective and people, there on the front line working in that space. I guess breweries can be quite hazardous work environments. So can you talk about the potential hazards and risks workers in the brewing industry are faced with? And I guess, how does Stone & Wood control these hazards and risks for workers?
Yeah, and we've actually partnered with Victual, Peter and David previously as well. Great to work with. And yeah, I mean, you make a good point. Breweries are quite hazardous places, and I think we could reel off a bunch of things you're exposed to on a daily basis. And I guess our common objective is to reduce that exposure and risk and likelihood and ultimately consequence. But it could be chemical exposure for cleaning, manual handling, hoses, kegs, you name it, malt bags. Certainly traffic and pedestrian interaction, forklifts in tight little areas, outbound, inbound traffic. Numerous gases that we have, carbon dioxide, could be chlorine dioxide, sterilant, ammonia, refrigeration, steam and heat, and of course, moving parts of machinery in the packaging area. And that's probably just touching on some of the more obvious stuff. And the way we go about it with regard to hazards, we actually have by site and also by function. So we've got each site maintaining their own hazard register. But we also extend that to road crew and events, acknowledging that there's also hazards, could be front of house as well, tasting rooms. And each kind of site lead, perhaps, for want of a better word, would take ownership of that hazard register, working with other people there, identify numerous hazards. Our biggest site, Murwillumbah, literally this hazard register has hundreds of hazards listed on it. The way we work through it is we actually categorise by consequence and likelihood, and therefore it gives us a risk rating. So we rate them both out of 5, and it's a multiplication thing. So obviously a 25 is basically stop work because someone's very likely to get very harmed. And we'd work from the top, start with the biggest hazards, nail them, and work our way down. We've done that kind of relentlessly, to be honest, for years on end, and just continuously hitting the top one. It's not always physical spend to increase. It could be an improved process. There's a few different principles you can apply, something called the hierarchy of control, about how you might first and foremost eliminate the hazard, and at the lowest level just use PPE. We use near misses and hazard forms as a bit of a weapon, to be honest. We have that out there. Simple paperwork, but it's about people raising things before something more harmful happens, and that's been hugely successful for us. We've had 10-fold reduction in incidents in the last 4 years since we introduced our concerted safety program, which we called Think, Do, Share. And more recently have extended that to Think, Do, Share and Care, which is touching on the mental health wellbeing elements. Elise, you could probably touch on some of that side of things.
Yeah, so I don't think this is unique to the brewing industry. I think every employer is recognising the responsibility for creating, a healthy work culture from a mental wellbeing perspective as well. And we've certainly put quite a bit of effort into that in the last few years. I think we've also always been cognizant of it, but, we've done a few things around putting more structured support in place for our people, whether that's through things such as we have an employee assistance program, which is a free counselling service for our people and their families that they can access sort of independent and separate to the business. So it's really confidential and easy for them to use. Through to we've implemented in the last 18 months a full sort of resilience training and education program for our people, which is all about equipping them with understanding and tools and resources for how you build your resilience and ability to bounce back. And we've added, a little bit Byron-centric and specific, but we've got a wellbeing wave, which is sort of based on the stress curve to help us talk with people about where they are with their wellbeing. That's embedded in all of our kind of people catch-ups as a bit of a structure to help those conversations and open up a conversation about wellbeing. And then we do things, every year we try and do a wellbeing day or a wellbeing week and just really try and hone in on what are all the elements, which is sometimes physical wellbeing, but it might also be other elements of mental health and mental wellbeing as well that we try to provide support in. So there's always lots that you can do in that space. But again, I think just attempting to do something and opening up the conversation with people is really an important part of creating a culture where people feel comfortable to say if they aren't okay or if they need a bit of extra help.
Yeah, and it's I mean, what we've found with time is there's a clear bridge, physical safety, mental safety. We're talking about holistic well-being, really, and it's actually one of those sort of areas where you can't just, there's not silver bullet to addressing it. We actually have tackled it so many different ways. I mentioned near miss tools, but we've had speakers come in and tell us of their quite harrowing stories, to be honest with you, but sometimes it's a hard lesson learned, and for us, it's better a lesson learned than the hard way. Touch wood, a bloody incident happening in one of our breweries. A lot of education, of course, on principles around safety. We have a functional safety committee that's cross-functional, so that team leaders, different team members across the entire business. We certainly have safety bedded into our SOPs and the way we do things on site. Simple personal protective equipment. There's a number of rich layers to it, and I think the success of our reduction in incidents and our growing area into the sort of mental health and well-being has been on our approach about tackling it in all sorts of different ways. And yes, on a most simplest form, there's a physical safety, insulating that steam pipe. That's at its most simple and raw form, physical safety, but the sort of multifaceted approach we've taken, I think, has really underpinned the success that we've had so far. And we certainly know we've got a long way to go. We're on a bit of a journey. So,
Well, Rich, you've been actually in the brewing industry for quite a number of years. You've worked at many different breweries sizes as well. Even, you mentioned Lion being one of them. What would you say? I mean, what seems to be, if you were to list one or two, what would you say are some of the reoccurring incidents or injuries, or even just near misses, whatever you want to call it, that seems to crop up all the time, I guess, across the brewing industry, just from your experiences?
Well, look, there's some that are more frequent than others. I mean, I reeled off a few of the different hazards, and it can be actually quite brewery dependent. What's the philosophy around chemical handling? Are we actually using CIP sets? Are people still carrying concentrated chemicals in buckets? And some of it comes down to education. Certainly scale is different as well. If we go back to some of the bigger guys, they've got the resource and finances to actually do some bigger changes. And there's a real tension, I suppose, for a growing brewer. The tension is on the resource, because there's a number of different ways we can spend not only our money but our time. And it's really hard to sort of point the finger and say this is the thing that's not right. I think there's some basic principles everyone can apply around, for example, just having the right personal protective equipment, being really conscious of falling from heights. That's well known as a real industry problem, not limited to brewing, but one of the main killers, to be honest, not just lost time injuries. Taking that approach, look at your highest hazards in your brewery and at least tackling them one by one is a good way to go. And rationally, that's all you can do. You haven't got unlimited resource. And also listen to the people, because I think what we say often, if it doesn't feel right and it feels uncomfortable, it's probably not, or is at least deserving of a second opinion and a second assessment. We also are very big on encouraging kind of safety conversations. It can be awkward to point out to one of your workmates, geez, that looks a bit dodgy, what you're doing there. And a good safety conversation is as much about having the courage to raise a question, to look after your mate, but also how you receive it, and that you don't take it the wrong way, that really someone's just trying to look out for you. And I think fundamentally safety and wellbeing is all underpinned by having a passion for people. I think we all know there's such great people working in our industry. So if you care about your team, if you care about your people, then you should really care about safety.
Well, I guess on to how a business owner can create and maintain a healthy team culture. And obviously, by the sounds of things, Stone & Wood have done that. I'm a big believer that if you have a healthy work culture, the long-term success of that company is in a lot better space than having one that's toxic and not talking to each other, I guess. So are you able to, I guess, explain for the audience what makes a healthy team culture? And obviously probably referring to some of the examples that Stone & Wood do, maybe some things that you guys have implemented. You mentioned early on some programs there, but if you want to sort of talk a bit about that and shed some light on it, that'd be great.
Yeah, I might I might get rolling with this one. This could be how long's a piece of string. But look, I might start generally just by saying I think to maintain or build a healthy culture or a good culture, you have to be clear on what you're trying to do. You have to actually want to know what is it that you're trying to achieve with a culture, and that will look different for every business. And whether that's expressing it through some company values or some behavioural kind of expectations for the team or team values, it doesn't have to look the same for every business. But culture is a really interesting thing because it will happen by itself, but as a business owner or as a leadership group or whatever, you will influence it. So being clear on what you're trying to achieve and the direction you want your culture to go is really important, because if you don't have that, I think you're just going to be kind of reactive and not really building something that has any strength or basis to it. So I think that's a good first step. And then I think you've got to keep it alive by talking about it, role modelling it, embedding it in everything that you do. It has to be visible and live to people. And I guess that's where, when we think about our safety culture, for example, the think, do, share, care model, that's why we try to do things like safety days or wellbeing weeks or whatever it may be, so that you don't just take this as a given. We're constantly reiterating what that is and why it's important to us. I think staying in touch with people and getting feedback from your team is really important, and there's a number of ways you can do that. You can just obviously ask for it and have good relationships with your team. There are a lot of great employee engagement survey tools around these days. We use one called Culture Amp, which is fantastic, but even a simple Survey Monkey, which is a really cost-effective tool, very user-friendly, just as a way to get feedback from people about how are they viewing what's happening in the business, what's important to them, how are you tracking. If you don't keep your finger on the pulse, I think, culture can get away from you. And that's when some of the examples you talked through around toxic culture and so on emerge, because, you've been so busy focusing on other things that you haven't checked in to see how people are actually feeling about the experience of coming to work. The other thing I think is we spend so much time at work, it has to be a good place to be. So, you have to make work pleasant, fun, enjoyable. And the ways that you do that might be around, as I said earlier, celebrating the good stuff, thinking about how you can support wellbeing at work. Or we do things like Friday lunches at our Mulwillen Bar production site. We do monthly lunches at Byron where the team actually cook for each other. We get, some fresh fruit delivered to offices, or, just small things that you can do that kind of make being at work nicer for people. Coffee helps. But also through to, I guess over the years we've had the fortune of introducing employee benefits, which are aimed at really making people feel like they're part of the business and that their time here is valuable, and not just valuable to us as an employer, but to them. Our employee share scheme is an example of that. Not everyone has the opportunity to implement a program like that. It's a pretty good one, but, maybe there's other ways you can think about how do you create value for your employees? How do you give back to them for what they give to you? And start small, and just as your success grows, add to that. So we have an employee share scheme in place, which is for all of our sort of permanent people who've been with us for 12 months at the time of the share offer. We are offered shares on the basis of a loan, which is fantastic. It's quite a generous way to structure the scheme. And what it means is we're able to enter the share scheme simply by being an employee in the business and our time here. And then every year you're given an opportunity to sort of add more shares to your parcel. It's an optional program, so it's not by force or anything like that. But our uptake is good. We're generally more than 70% of our staff at any given time are employee shareholders. And it's an amazing scheme that was really driven by the founders, and I think their desire to create, a conscious business and a workplace that really recognises and gives back to the people for what they put into it as one element, but also that we want people to feel like we're all in this together and that they are co-owners in the business. And that's sort of a foundational element of our culture for our particular business. I spoke earlier about the need to kind of be clear on that. And that's one of the things that is very important to us. And own our future is actually one of our values as a business and behaviours. So it's really about driving, not just that you get to join a share scheme and there's a financial benefit for that if the shares go well, but also that it should influence your behaviour at work and your care factor and how you operate.
Yeah, there's a genuine investment in the business. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Another, I guess, area I wanted to cover was, I've heard about some breweries implementing these, training programs, internal training programs, where they get people from different departments, whether it's production floor members, doing a couple of days in the sales team and vice versa, sales guys working on the production floor. And it seems to be something, that helps everyone understand each other's roles and the work and the moving parts within a business, especially a brewery. Is that something Stone & Wood do as well?
Yeah, mate, absolutely. And I think you kind of touched on that question. Ultimately, it's there to build a couple of things for me. I think empathy with what other people have as challenges, but then also connection to see how your actions might impact theirs or otherwise, and ultimately how you might collaborate. We do that as part of induction. So, for example, if you are new to the Brew Pack team, you'd spend a day on the road. In fact, that's often across the business. The other thing that's also part of that induction is a day in Brew and Pack. That's a starting point, but not limited to that. And really, we'd be open to anyone at any stage doing something cross-functionally. We often see that. And it might be just curiosity, or ideally it'd be linked somehow to your development plan. Elise mentioned earlier, I think, around the role team leaders plan. Each of our team members will have an annual plan that will clearly map out not only their accountabilities but how they develop. And we look at it in a few different ways. And we have professional funds available for professional training, but we also have what we call personal funds, and that's actually to learn a skill that's got nothing to do with our industry. So I think some examples, leather making, four-wheel drive lessons. I plan to learn how to use my offset smoker properly, and not make such dry bloody brisket. And, beyond that, we have some more structured stuff. Brewing and packaging, we've introduced and built something called the production matrix, which actually shows how you can step through from essentially an entry-level technician and with no expectation of skills, but we will train, and then how you can graduate up through to, brewer, packer, Stone & Wood level, and then we have other levels, and each level would attract a bit of a celebration, a bit of a REM increase too, because it's a win-win. So that's something that we have in place that we look to perhaps roll out to other larger teams like the Row Crew. And other smaller areas, we still have structured development plans and pathways, which ultimately are great tools for team leaders in those discussions. It's one of those areas that you can keep going on, and we have every intention to. For everyone to get up to work, Elise, you said a second ago, you want to enjoy work, and I also firmly believe you want to enjoy and feel like you've got something out of that day and progress a little in a direction that you wanted to, whether it was a tough day or a good day. And so development's just so key. It's a motivational thing as well as a important thing for business.
And it's interesting you bring up that production matrix, I guess, a program that you've got, because it's so important, I guess, for especially new staff members and also for people that have been there for a while, wanting to know. I mean, everyone has this urge to climb the ladder when they come to a business, and if they enter a new business and there's no indication of them moving up or improving themselves, career-wise, I guess it will start eating into your staff retention and turnover as well. And I know that in companies I've been with, some of the best companies in the world always have these clear career pathways. And basically what you're saying with Stone & Wood, they will tell you, if you hit these sort of milestones and these sort of KPIs, there's these opportunities. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but I think with no emphasis on ladder climbing, that's actually probably quite oppositional to our culture.
Well, I guess that's very traditional of me to say. I guess it's all very progressive these days.
We talk about it being a jungle gym rather than a ladder.
Right.
Yeah, it could be.
Right.
Well, I mean, I could give you some examples recently where one of our sales guys now is in production. We've got actually a brewer went into sales.
Yeah.
We had a commercial person jump. These sorts of things are great. Also, firm believers as we grow and things become more complex is that you can grow hugely just in the role you're in. And so when I describe that matrix, we're not giving out, they're not new role titles and new role positions per se. They just represent a growth in your own role. And that's really important. We're still developing and it's still recognising success, but it's not like it comes with the whole new title thing that you might be in a more traditional sense of the corporate structure. So cognizant of that, but notwithstanding, if the right opportunity comes up and someone's ready, absolutely. It's just that under a flat structure, there's not ladders left, right and centre.
Yeah, well, I guess it's very anti of what you've tried to create. You're not wanting to create this hierarchical type company structure. So I guess that model doesn't really belong in a flat structure. But I guess, yeah, it's a nice way that you've put that jungle gym.
I think the other thing too, is, and this loops back to creating a healthy work culture and caring for your people, is knowing your people and what they want. So, because you can have the opposite in an environment where you think everyone wants to progress and wants to climb a ladder or whatever it may be, and you put pressure on people to do that. There are some people that just want to come in and do an awesome day's work and be great at their job, and that's satisfying, and that's totally okay. I think a lot of businesses lost their way with feeling like they had to push everyone up a ladder. And actually, there's people out there in this industry that just want to smash out cracking beers all day. And that's
be a gun brewer.
A gun brewer, or, look after our customers and just enjoy themselves. So, you've got to kind of know that as well, I think, to create a good culture around career and career development.
Another thing, just going back to some of these incentive and reward programs, I think it was Dogfish Head, I heard, maybe I saw one of their documentaries talk about how anyone in the workplace, or maybe more on the brewery production floor, and I think, Rich, you might have mentioned earlier about people doing home brewing and pilot beers, I think Dogfish Head have this scheme of where if you can come up with a brand new recipe, an innovative twist on a beer style, and they sort of do a little homebrew batch of it, a pilot batch, then they share it around at, lunchtime or after work. And if it seems to be the consensus is it's a good beer, and they would, I guess, management would then decide, well, we'll roll this out as a seasonal and we'll see how it is. Is that something that Stoneham would have as well?
We actually do. We didn't model it on Dogfish Head. I have seen their little brew kit thing there, and they have a great thing going. What we have is something called the League of Extraordinary Brewers, which is kind of internal piss take name, but it's actually, it's a great thing. It's like, and it's actually not limited to brewing packaging. So like I said earlier, it could be Elise's team, and they have brewed some rippers. And what we do is on a regular basis put out like a theme that we're trying to brew. I think at the moment it's an American amber. People get pretty serious about it. People do labels and stuff. It's great. We actually do blind taste testing. And, some of the cracking beers, if you win that, we actually say you can brew, ideally, that beer on the pilot kit, at least a beer, but probably that beer. And then, so that would go on to one of the tasting rooms. And, of course, we're lucky enough to have Byron, Brisbane, and the incubator to do that, and even now Tubers, I suppose. And then if the consumers love that, then it could go to the next level. So, I mean, the dream is, one of those to go all the way to a counterculture, or even all year
Yeah, wow.
Full range. And some of them have gone part way, and actually some of the countercultures are inspired on some of the at least pilot brews and very close to. But no, we've certainly got that in place. It's alive and kicking, and gets bloody great turnout. And I tell you what, cracking beers, people are massively enthusiastic. Producing fault-free beers on homebrew kit is, it's not easy, and these are better than that. They're fault-free, but they're pushing styles and they're creative. And Keelan, our head brewer, gives them pause for thought. How could that play in and be either the next counterculture concept, or maybe with freshly hatched with Fixation or what have you. And it's a great kind of nurturing ground. And with the tasting rooms, like I say, you can actually test with your drinkers right there and get some feedback. So it's a good little scalable model we do have here, and we're lucky enough to have brew houses that sort of sit at each level: 600 hec, 25 hec at Byron, and then a couple of 50s at Northern. So
how big's your pilot kit?
600 litre.
Okay, so decent size, yeah.
Yeah, we got one of those at like I say, incubator at Brizzy and Byron, and great size, and certainly we get, that's what pours through in the taps at Byron, apart from the core range, and just to give, it's a great proving ground for innovation, and knocked out over 100 different recipes across all the sites last year, and I'm probably underestimating that. And so it's exciting. It gives a lot of creative avenue as well for our team.
Yeah, I think it's a great little program, and just to get everyone involved in the process and talk about it. And the incentive of it maybe going big one day. That's another great incentive. So,
yeah, it'll happen. Don't worry.
Well, all that's great, and some great takeaways there for what people can think about. And once again, most of the people listening to this show are probably at the stage I'm at. They're in their planning, or they're about to pull the trigger on some equipment, but it's good things that they can consider early on, because they're probably doing it for themselves in the beginning, a couple of mates, and then what do they do next when they start getting a bit of success and demand? They've got to bring employees on. So understanding, I guess, some of the more formal understandings of what they need to be doing. So all that content there is great to share with people. But industry insights, Rich, maybe to kick it off, we've got a couple other avenues we can go down here. And I know, Lisa, you're going to cover a bit about the COVID side and so forth. But Rich, love to hear your thoughts on, I guess, the future of craft here in Australia.
Yeah, I think sort of things playing out at the moment are well documented and discussed, but certainly there's ever increasing localization and backyard turf, not turf wars per se, but sort of trying to strengthen up that backyard. And that's I guess, a direct product of having so many fantastic breweries pop up all over Australia. I mean, you hear about another one every other week, and there's some cracking beers and great brews around the shop. So I wouldn't have it any other way. So I think that's going to continue, and best of luck with your brewery when that drops. We'll be looking to drop in when that comes. You've got interesting sort of stuff happening. Probably COVID gave it a kickstart, but to the direct-to-drinker piece and last mile, we certainly saw a bit of development in that part of our offering, triggered by COVID, but maintaining that. That probably is only going to grow as a different channel and route to market. And in addition to that, we talked about having your own premises and moving away from a traditional model of just distribution of kegs and pack, but to realise full retail, no distribution of freight, great cash flow at your door, essentially your cellar door. That's becoming a new model, I suppose, not only for your classic brewer startups, but almost people looking from the greater drinks industry thinking, geez, look, there's a lot of success in that model. Why don't they might be, let's say, bar-centric as a starting point, and then add that little brew house in there to give it that feel that we know, or that authenticity that's associated with brewing. So I think they'll continue. We've got, and I guess the near beer segment, so not just brewing, but not only just pushing the limits of what a beer is, but then starting to tick into things, the obvious example is seltzer, but not limited to that, and experimentation there. I guess we'll see how far seltzer kicks here, whether it kicks as far as it has in the US, but that sort of stuff is emerging. People are experimenting. People are sort of blurring the line between wine and beer, cross-use of, whether it's must or wort or yeast. It's all really exciting, interesting stuff. And I think, as much as there's all that on show, each brewery might still need to consider what's their niche, whether it's, can't be a jack of all trades. What do you sort of stand for and go with that? And I think, this episode of, what the topic we're talking about today is crucial here. We're talking about I think we're in a good place as an industry in terms of the people to really experiment and do all those sorts of things. And perhaps 10 years ago, when we started training our own brewers, it might have been more challenging. But I would argue now that there's some fantastic, not only brewers, to be honest, it's the wider brewing industry that across all facets, whether it's commercial or sales or what have you, there's such a strong base now. So, I reckon the industry is really well positioned to kind of address this really dynamic market at the moment, and certainly we'll keep having a crack at different areas as well, and keep a close eye on how things play out.
Has Stone & Wool got a seltzer at the moment?
We do. We launched Sunley seltzer. So we've got a few early days of Sunley and early days of seltzer in general, I guess. But early days, it's going fairly well and being really well received.
Yeah, no, it's been talked about so much on this podcast, seltzers. I only just started to have my first couple when I started doing this podcast. I'd never really heard of it, really. So now I feel like I can't get away from it. It's all in nearly all the main breweries are doing it these days, and so forth. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure if it's a beer, to be honest.
No, look, I think there's many different ways to brew it. It's perhaps even not even defined definitively to find out there. But we actually do brew ours on a cereal base, but I've heard all sorts of different ways people are making it. You can obviously just, at the most elemental, just add a bit of ethanol to some water.
Yeah. It's almost like a spirit, isn't it? Or RTD, yeah.
RTD, I think so. It's an interesting growing area. Will in itself have different splinters of artisanal seltzers versus maybe more RTD made, or I guess we'll see what plays out. But it's certainly whatever happens and goes big in the US, I think everyone in Australia has a pretty attentive eye to that, and has proven to be a lot of those trends, not all, but a lot of those trends have proven to play out in Australia as well. So it's probably no surprise that there's a lot of interest in seltzer, and whether it's received in the same way, I guess we'll see in the medium term.
Just, I guess, a question I had, and either of you want to chime in on this, but I guess what we're seeing is, well, are you seeing more and more, I guess, the smaller craft breweries, independent breweries, starting to make those leaps into the medium and large size breweries? I mean, Stone and Wood has led the way. I mean, well, prior to that, there was Little Creatures, and I mean, but if we're talking about independent, do you think we're going to start seeing more and more larger craft breweries with the years to come, or do you think we're going to be it's just reserved now for those brew pub type setups? There's only going to be a number of large breweries sort of playing in that space.
Oh, look, I think there's going to be more, crossing that sort of 1 million litre threshold, and I think it's bloody awesome. And I mean, I reckon there's probably a place at each different level, but I think there's lots of breweries crossing into that kind of territory now and upgrading or getting their Cody filler, or maybe upgrading to a rotary. You only have to look at, say, something like the Hottest 100 and have a look down those names. Yeah, getting quite substantial. A lot of them have opened production breweries, not just those tap rooms, or have both, to be honest.
Yep.
And ultimately, collectively as an indie brewing industry, hopefully we're just taking volume off the big volume lagers, to be honest, and rather than competing directly with ourselves. Not to say that's not happening, but it's if you look at some of the metrics, craft as a total segment is still growing very strongly, and we see things like West End closing down, others that give us pretty big clues of what might be happening at a macro level. So I think it's a healthy state to be in, but there's probably still that niche for a really super localized tap room. And if that's the business model and that's the objective, that's fantastic. But long may craft indie brewing industry grow and crack on. And I mean, there's too many good beers floating around to name them all here, but I think we all know we're in pretty good health.
Yeah. No, that's been the theme with a lot of my guests throughout the podcast so far. So, Elise, did you want to, I guess, share some thoughts around the impact COVID's had on the Stone and Wood workforce, and I guess some of I'd like to hear how you guys managed. It is a year to date of when we all felt the serious impacts here in Australia. So, are you able to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think I'll briefly touch on, some of the ways we managed it, but maybe I'll focus more on, what it's meant and where we're at and what I think the implications are. We certainly, like a lot of organisations, had to flex into, new work structures, people working from home, changing shift patterns. The hygiene standards and safety standards were just next level, which has had some enduring impacts, which is good. And really, we had to have a lot of adaptability and flexibility in our workforce. We had people kind of shifting focus, doing different things, doing things they'd never done before. We set up some project teams to kind of think about how do we navigate this and keep everyone together. Certainly cost management became absolutely critical, and we had to, I guess, take some pretty significant measures there. And at the other side, I think we look at that now and say, well, what that means is, I think, the importance of a sustainable business model and good business planning and financial planning has always been a feature of our business. But I think what people have appreciated is what that meant at a time of crisis. So I definitely think a focus on costs and good planning is going to be enduring in our business and with our teams. I think the appetite for adapting and flexibility and agility in our teams has really come to the fore. I think, a lot of us just felt very fortunate that we still had employment and that, the business weathered the storm. And I think that has made us all appreciate how, if we need to change, then we need to change. And what does that look like and kind of get on with it, which has been really good culturally. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with flexible work practices. I think every employer, not just the brewing industry, I mean, obviously for people actually in brewing and packaging and production, it's a different story, but certainly we learned some lessons on shift structures and what that meant for people and the benefits it had for people. And we actually implemented a change to our shift structure post-COVID and have a bit more flexible work practices for our other teams. Whether that lasts or whether the world contracts back to wanting everyone in an office, or I don't know, but trying to find the balance, not having people work from home full time because we value our culture and that connectedness so much, but just giving a bit more flex and freedom on working from home and so on for that, balance in life. So, yeah.
Was it 75 plus casuals that you said that you guys had or have?
Well, the wider business is about 150. And 150. From a brewery point of view, in terms of people who are brewing, packaging or supporting that, there's about 70 odd plus casual. So, yeah.
Did the impact of COVID mean that there was a number of people that had to be let go just to sort of manage, what everyone in the world was dealing with at that time?
Look, a little bit of both, but what I'd say is, I guess, for some elements of our casual crew who we love and do an amazing job for us, there just wasn't the work for them to do. So an example of that would be we often have roadies who are out supporting our sales team. They might drop into bottle shops, they might do tastings, they might do events. That work just didn't exist all of a sudden. So there wasn't a lot we could do about that. I think we managed to keep most of our casual crew going in production, Rich, didn't we? Because we kept producing. And very fortunate for us, we managed to weather the storm with no redundancies for our staff who were
on a permanent
basis. So I think that's what I was alluding to before. We all had a lot of gratitude through that period, I think, for what we were able to do to look after people. And we certainly took the view of, let's see if we can get through this with, everyone's still on the boat, and we did. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, and it was an ultimate acid test for culture, and I guess that's what we're talking about today, but you can't simulate something like that, and we all respond in different ways, but we learned a lot. But to really have navigated that, as challenging as it was, to come out the other side still talking to each other and, and in fact, in many ways, whether it's hygiene or being a bit more cost conscious and all those sorts of things, having actually learned something out of a crisis was great as well, to somehow take a silver lining out of those shutdowns. Of course, COVID's still a thing right now, but I think talk about COVID proper, the proper national shutdowns, it was a very challenging time. And for our team to be really agile, ready to pivot, change roles if necessary, and even to see the underlying resilience was it was really satisfying, I suppose. And we know everyone was sorely tested, and there wasn't a person who could say it wasn't a challenging time. But as hard as it was, I think we're richer for the experience, and it probably strengthened our culture.
Yeah, I would imagine it would. Everyone banding together like that, and another theme of, I guess, not just business related, but the wider industry and just in other industries, there's now a greater focus on local more than ever, and. That's been a regular theme that's been brought up on the podcast, is about, people not just going to their local craft brewery, but going to their local cafe, going to their local grocery, just thinking local. And I think that's the silver lining as well. Well, yeah, I guess that summed it up really nicely there. And I guess before we do part ways, any closing thoughts or advice either of you like to mention?
Look, for me, on the safety one, it's something I'm pretty passionate about. And I said it earlier, but I think it just comes with having a passion for people. So, look, I really encourage anyone out there to make sure that, you're kind of taking people under your wing. They're looking for you to be that person who provides a safe environment. And if you care about them and you're passionate for people, you'll do that. And remembering that it is a bit of a journey. I know it's a cliche, but if you treat it as a short-term project, right, safety's done, then you've got an issue. It's just got to be a business as usual focus. Look after one another, and I think we'll be right.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Rich and Elise, for sharing your time with us today. Once again, it wasn't, I guess, another topic I wasn't considering when going into this. I was always thinking shiny stainless steel and in regards to starting a brewery. And I guess if everyone's followed me on this path of learning about the industry and how to go about setting up a brewery, is that there's so many things that you just don't think about. And I think this will shed a lot of light on future business owners. Yeah, without me rambling on any further, I guess we'll finish it off. Thanks again, Rich and Elise, for coming on the Build Me a Brewery podcast.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Build Me a Brewery podcast. That was part 2 of our People and Culture Training and Safety segment. Part 3 of the segment, we heavily dive into the formal training options available across Australia and globally for the brewing industry. As always, if you are liking the podcast so far and find the content useful, please give us a follow and rating on whatever platform you are listening on. Also, follow us on all our social media handles, as well as visiting our website, www.buildmeabrewery.com.au. I'll also mention to listeners that we now have a new Build Me a Brewery discussion group linked to our Facebook page. Now, this is a group of keen listeners and like-minded people discussing their brewery build plans and providing advice to others on the subject. Link to this group will be in the episode show notes. That's all for now. I'm Chris Hayton, your host, and this is the Build Me a Brewery podcast.